What's going on, guys? I'm Tyler, and yes, I am back. And I'm here to let you know that the New Mutants is No Perfect Movie, and is finally in theaters after all of this. So, The New Mutants is about five teenagers played by Blu Hunt, Maisie Williams, Anya Taylor-Joy, Charlie Heaton, and Henry Zaga, and they all come to believe that the head nurse of this facility, not to mention the only nurse in this facility, Reyes, played by Alice Braga, is hiding a lot of very key components as to what this facility is, whether or not it's really a hospital, and what happens to them after they leave, if and when they leave, especially when they start to experience hallucinations that become physical and long term. And like most people, I was excited to see this movie because an X-Men horror movie that takes place in a hospital that in actuality might be a haunted house, that is a really cool concept. And a lot of people were so excited about the trailer, the horror vibe, the fact that it had this very ominous remix of Another Brick in the Wall, had me so excited that every time the trailer came on in theaters or online, I either closed my eyes or turned it around and just listened to what was going on. I listened to the music, the dialogue, the horror sound effects that are thrown in there, like the constant jumps or the screams, and I got really excited, and I wanted to walk in as blindly as I could. As many people know, that was back in 2018, and I thought, okay, well, if it comes out in 2019 and it turns out it wasn't really supposed to be a full-fledged horror movie, just a superhero movie with horror moments, then changing it into a superhero horror movie full on would be really cool. And then it got delayed again, and then it turns out that there weren't going to be any reshoots because apparently the original vision that Josh Boone made was already captured before the trailer came out. So there was a lot of confusing stuff going on, and the fact that Disney bought Fox for reasons that might not have been well intentioned, let's be completely honest about that, it didn't really help, and it got a lot of people really concerned. I tried to remain optimistic because Cabin in the Woods got shelved for 3 years, and it's considered one of the greatest horror movies of the 21st century because, well, it is. And I can safely say this: The New Mutants is by no means as bad as people are saying it is right now. I know it sits at a 20% on Rotten Tomatoes. I know it's the lowest rated X-Men movie, but it's not the worst X-Men movie. If anything, I can't really even say in good conscience that this was a bad movie because throughout the entire runtime, I can't really say that I was bored. And let's be completely honest, the 20% on Rotten Tomatoes would be like 30 to 40% if all the critics in LA and New York were actually going to see this movie, if Disney was actually going to put up some socially distant feeders for them to review the film. So there are a lot of unfair circumstances, and while I can't say it's a bad movie, I struggle to say that it's a great or just good movie in general. But I am going to start off with the positives first. For starters, the main five actors all give really good performances, especially Blu Hunt. She is the central protagonist of the story, despite the fact that Maisie Williams is billed as top star just because, well, she's Maisie Williams. Because Blu Hunt, especially as Danny Moonstar, was very mysterious. We always start from her perspective ever since the beginning of the movie, where she's thrust into this incredibly dangerous situation, and once that's over, she wakes up in the hospital. She's completely traumatized. She has no idea why she's there, and it becomes a bit of a mystery from her perspective what this hospital is. And once she meets all the other mutants who have powers that they're very unwilling to share, it also makes us question her as a character because we don't know what her powers are, and for the majority of the movie she doesn't even know what her powers are either. So it is a very intriguing mystery that becomes more fleshed out once she starts interacting with the other characters, especially Maisie Williams and Anya Taylor-Joy. And I knew this was going to happen either way, but Maisie Williams was my favorite out of the New Mutants for sure because she is the most open about her pain and personal struggles when she discovered what her mutation was for the first time. I'm not going to spoil it, but some of you have probably already known for a fact what her powers are and how it kind of interconnects with her Game of Thrones fame in a very unintentionally silly kind of way. But as is, I love the connection that she had between her and Danny. That was something that I completely wasn't expecting. I also wasn't expecting the tension to come out between Danny and Anya Taylor-Joy as this one woman who's basically the outcast slash bully of the troop. If anything, she's actually kind of racist towards Danny, which was something I wasn't expecting. I wasn't expecting a PG-13 horror movie to have a lot of Native American slurs thrown in, which I'm kind of surprised this movie got away with a PG-13 just based on that. But it's Anya Taylor-Joy's character is one that you start off hating, but you get used to because, like most soul outcasts slash bullies, there's a lot of hidden pain that makes her seemingly the most honest and yet the most secretive because she has no problem admitting that she has killed some people, whether or not it was for the right or wrong reasons. And that's the thing that really haunts her throughout this hospital, which we'll get to later on because some of it works and some of it doesn't. Now, out of those three actresses, those are the main characters that you can identify with the most because they're the ones that the movie focuses on for the majority. Charlie Heaton and Henry Zaga are there. You know what their powers are, you know what the personal pains they're going through are, especially how it interconnects with the other ladies, because the one thing each of these New Mutants have in common is, whether they meant to or not, whether it was for right reasons or not, they have killed people. And that whole idea of confronting the past, accepting that you can't change these previous actions, the only thing you can do is learn from them, and also accepting that some of those actions were not their fault regardless. Their violent urges, the things that they've done, the people that they've killed are all metaphors for the inner struggles that these characters are going through, whether it would be their sexuality, whether or not it would be past crimes committed by others upon them, stuff like that. And I felt like there was an opportunity to explore that with Reyes as this Nurse Hatchet type of character, because a lot of people are going to compare her in regards to how she abuses her authority over these teenagers, whether she believes it's for the right reasons or not. And you get the sense that she, even though she has clearly malicious intent, she still considers herself a good person and that she's only doing what's best for them, even if it means harming them or even attempting to kill them. The only thing is, Alice Braga's performance was obviously deliberately dry, but it was a little too dry, and it was hard to really find her all that intimidating even when she should be expressing a lot of over-the-top emotions as this very strict and authoritarian nurse. She doesn't really act out. I know that she was supposed to be dry in order to be unsettling and how unfazed by anything she is, but it kind of wears off after a while. Which reminds me, let's get to the horror aspects of this movie, because some of it works and some of it doesn't. It's a PG-13 horror movie. There's some stuff that you can't do. So I think Josh Boone tried to compensate with that by having us care for the characters first, and then once they experience these hallucinations, the reason that they become scary is because the actors are clearly portraying a lot of suppressed emotions and hidden pain. And that's the thing that really makes the scares in this film very unsettling. And I also really appreciate the fact that Josh Boone did not sell for jump scares. If anything, the only jump scares you can really point out are the ones where they slowly creep up on you. Like when someone's standing alone in a room and then a hand just slowly comes behind and grabs them. It's just like any other movie would just go boom. And it would suck because it wasn't built up enough. So in regards to building up tension and coming up with the payoff, the scare, all the technique is there, and it's for the most part effectively well done. It's just that some of the scares, when they try to be a little jumpy and full on disturbing in regards to the imagery itself isn't always as disturbing as it could be. The stuff with Maisie Williams is the most unsettling because it's as gnarly as you can possibly get. She imagines this one person who has scars all over his face that she might have inflicted on, but you also get the sense that she was acting in self-defense based on how the hallucination plays out. And I also like how there's that one picture of her in the shower that everyone saw in the trailer. I like how there's mist that covers all over it in order to try and make us wonder what exactly this person did to her that make her act so violent towards him. But there are so many things about the eventual payoff of some scares that either fizzle out very quickly or become very unintentionally hilarious. Like the eventual conclusion of Reyes as a character. I think it goes without saying what's going to happen. I won't spoil it, but her conclusion was very anticlimactic and kind of silly. In fact, the whole haunting that Anya Taylor-Joy is going through, I should have been really freaked out by it because she was mistreated by so many different people. But these creatures that haunt her throughout the hospital, they look unbelievably ridiculous. If anything, they look like faceless people with venom teeth, and I could find that scary, but because it's so blatantly CG, it kind of takes the tension out of it because they don't feel tangible. I do believe that there were people acting it out in mocap, but this movie, all the behind the scenes stuff before the trailer came out, they were bragging about how practical they were, how they didn't use green screen. And I believe that. There's only one location. There's no reason this movie would have been green screened, but you could have had guys in makeup cover up their eyes, their noses, their mouth, and everything, and it would have looked fucking creepy. But because it's not exactly the most convincing CGI, if anything, the Venom CGI was better, it looked ridiculous, especially when these kids who have mutant powers and abilities mostly spend the time running away, because that's one thing about this movie that works and doesn't work. They're all so haunted by the violence they've committed that they rarely want to use their powers ever, and it is a really good idea and a good concept, and it makes you focus on the characters' personalities and backstories a lot more. But when there are moments where they really should be lashing out, fighting back in self-defense, whether or not they're afraid of repeating their past actions, there's a difference between an innocent man who you hallucinate on a daily basis or this guy that looks like Venom just in a suit and top hat. But when the characters have to use their powers eventually as per the climax, it's surprisingly a little underwhelming because you've waited so long for these characters to use their powers, and some of them in the climax don't really make them all that useful. Like, Maisie Williams especially has really cool powers. She only uses them in self-defense once. The other 2 times were by accident, and when she does try to fight in the climax, long story short, it doesn't work, and it wouldn't have worked. And I just sat there and I went, if you were going to use this villain, why would you even have her if her powers were completely useless? But the big problem for me in regards to the New Mutants is that sometimes it's not really a horror movie. The tones feel very mishmashed and all over the place. And I think that they should have went forward with the reshoots after that trailer came out. Then it would have been, at the very least, a consistent horror movie. Because at first, it does start off with a horror intro. And then once they get to the hospital, it's mainly a drama that has some psychological tension. It's very much a psychological drama in that of Hereditary, where the scariest stuff are the arguments and conflict between the characters. And that part starts off nice. And then it veers into psychological horror where you're not entirely sure what's going on. And then once it's crystal clear what exactly is happening, then the horror is clearly defined. I don't want to spoil it. And there are even some mishmashed attempts at comedy that they were fine, but not only did I not laugh, I found them harmless but still corny, especially with Henry Zaga as Sunspot, who is the least fleshed out. You don't care that much about him because he rarely is given an opportunity to be well developed, let alone be focused on, let alone have his powers be a threat to the other kids, let alone himself or the actual villains. As you can tell by this review, my thoughts are all over the place because this movie really is all over the place, and there's a lot of stuff that doesn't entirely work. But the things that did work, like the performances and the occasional very effective psychological tension of being stuck in one place with people who are strangers and may or may not be as dangerous or more dangerous than you, it's a really good idea, and for the most part, it is well executed. It's just that the problems of this movie are equally as strong and do kind of take you out of the experience, because sometimes it'll be a full-fledged horror, then it'll be a drama, then it'll be a comedy with a montage sequence that rips off The Breakfast Club of all things, because they bragged about it being because the people who wrote the movie bragged about it being a mishmash of John Hughes movie with Stephen King, and for the most part it actually is. That's the most consistent thing about it. So yeah, I keep going off track because, as I said before, this movie keeps going off track. The tone is really inconsistent. The villain isn't really all that threatening, and the final climax wasn't that investing because I knew who was going to live, who was going to die, and because I waited so long for them to use their powers in the slightest possible way, it kind of just fizzled out because they didn't even take full potential with their powers. I don't know if that was a budgetary thing on the filmmakers' part, but nevertheless, I'm still glad that I saw the movie, and I still think it was all right. It was decent. The actors all do a really good job except for Alice Braga, but minor detail. I like the way Josh Boone makes this one hospital feel claustrophobic, but also a slight bit welcoming, because these characters do take the time to get to know each other and their weaknesses and their potential strengths that they realize they need to use in order to move on, accept the past, and proceed to move forward within their own lives. So for all of those very confusing and inconsistent reasons, I'm going to give the New Mutants a 3 out of 5. I do encourage you to go to theaters and discover your own opinion for yourself. Don't listen to the 20%, because whether or not you agree with it or not, the only way you're going to find out is if you go see it for yourself. And as I pointed out, if you're in Canada, these theaters are safe. And there are theaters full of employees that need to make a living. So if you have the chance, take it. It'll be worth it for you, hopefully. Guys, thanks as always for watching. If by any chance you have seen The New Mutants, let me know in the comments below what you thought of it. Be sure to stay tuned for more reviews as soon as I see Tenet a second time, among other movies. And be sure to like and subscribe. Take care.